The cafeteria at Grimweald Middle School was unusually silent. Rain tapped against the high windows, and the overhead lights buzzed faintly in the stale afternoon air. Officer Vorrak Bloodsnarl knelt in the middle of the room beside his K-9 partner, Snarlgrim, a powerful German shepherd with a jagged scar over his muzzle and a sense for danger that had never failed. But today, Vorrak could feel something different. The silence wasn't just silence. It was warning. Near them crouched a wide-eyed girl in a pink shirt and faded jeans. Lysira Skulfong, 13 years old, pale and breathing fast. She had called 911 after hearing strange sounds under the cafeteria floor the night before. Soft moans, like someone trapped or hurt. No one at the school believed her. But Vorrak had learned never to ignore a child's fear. And now Snarlgrim had stopped cold, frozen like stone in front of a floor vent. The dog's posture was stiff, his teeth bared but silent. His body radiated tension. He wasn't barking. He was growling low and deep, his eyes locked on the vent like it held something ancient and wrong. Vorrak narrowed his eyes. Snarlgrim had sniffed out explosives, bodies, fugitives, but he had never looked like this. Something under that floor wasn't right. Vorrak pulled the metal grate open. It creaked slowly, revealing darkness and the heavy smell of mold, rusted metal, and something organic. Old. His flashlight beam cut into the hole and revealed a narrow tunnel beneath the school, lined with crumbling cement. This wasn't any maintenance shaft. It looked like it had been dug long ago, then forgotten. Lysira crept closer. "This isn't in the school's plans," Vorrak muttered, his voice tight. "Do you think someone's down there?" Lysira asked, voice shaking. Snarlgrim gave one sharp bark, then stepped back, trembling. And then, something moved. Below. Vorrak leaned forward, listening. From the depths of the tunnel came the sound of shallow, wet breathing. Not fast, not desperate, just present. Then another sound followed, a dragging noise. Familiar. Vorrak's chest tightened. His heart raced as a memory slammed back into place. 1997. The year Dren Hollowgaze, his younger brother, vanished without a trace in a case that was never solved. Snarlgrim barked again, louder now as if to push Vorrak back from the edge. Something or someone was down there, and Vorrak knew, deep in his bones, that this wasn't just about the school anymore. Vorrak Bloodsnarl barely slept that night. He sat in his dimly lit kitchen, staring at the open case file from 1997. The year Dren Hollowgaze, his younger brother, disappeared without a trace during a school lockdown drill. No leads, no body, just a void where his family used to be whole. Snarlgrim lay by his feet, ears alert, occasionally lifting his head toward the hallway as if he sensed something moving in the dark. Vorrak's mind kept replaying the breathing sound in the tunnel, and the dragging. The next morning, Vorrak returned to Grimweald Middle School before the janitors arrived. He needed to see the tunnel again, alone. Lysira Skulfang's testimony had been dismissed by the school staff, but Vorrak couldn't shake the way her voice trembled when she spoke. She had heard something, and now he had too. He moved quickly through the cafeteria, crouched by the vent, and lowered his flashlight once more into the opening. The stale air met him like a wall. This time he went in. The tunnel was narrow and uneven, with cold concrete walls and rusted pipes lining the sides. Vorrak crawled for several yards, Snarlgrim following silently behind him. The dog's tail was low, ears twitching at every sound. Vorrak's breathing grew shallow as he advanced further, guided only by the weak beam of his flashlight and a memory that refused to die. Then he saw it. A torn piece of flannel cloth caught on a broken pipe. Blue and black plaid, the same shirt Dren had worn the day he vanished. He froze. The light in his hand trembled. "No way," he whispered. His fingers touched the fabric. Dust crumbled beneath his fingertips, but the cloth held together. This wasn't a memory. This was real. He stuffed the cloth into an evidence bag, heart pounding. Snarlgrim growled low, again. Vorrak turned his head slowly. Behind them, deeper into the tunnel, came the faint echo of footsteps, but too soft to be walking. They sounded like crawling. Vorrak didn't wait. He backed out fast, Snarlgrim reversing with him, both of them scraping against the concrete. As they reached the cafeteria again, Vorrak sealed the grate and stood in the silence, his pulse still racing. Something was alive under that school, and it had been there for years, maybe watching, maybe waiting, and Vorrak knew this was no longer just a missing persons case. It was the beginning of something buried, something forgotten on purpose. Later that evening, Vorrak Bloodsnarl stood outside the Dusty Records building on the edge of town. Most people in Grimweald had forgotten it existed, but he remembered the name Kedra Ironwhale, a former school district planner who had mysteriously resigned 2 decades ago. If anyone knew about hidden construction beneath the school, it was her. Vorrak scanned the shelves of old, unmarked files until one brittle folder caught his eye. The label read, Sublevel Modifications, 1996. His heart sank. Inside were blueprints of the school, original and altered versions. One diagram showed a sprawling network of access tunnels under the cafeteria, marked and used, restricted entry. Vorrak traced the lines with his finger. Some corridors were sealed off, others simply labeled void. One tunnel curved into an area beneath the gym, then stopped abruptly. No notes, no explanation, but someone had drawn an X there in red ink. A second later, Snarlgrim growled softly beside him. Vorrak stiffened. A creak echoed down the hallway behind him. Vorrak turned, flashlight raised. Standing at the entrance was a woman with sharp gray eyes and a worn trench coat. Velra Doomlash. A private historian who'd been investigating local disappearances for years, Velra had a reputation for knowing things before others did. "You're not the only one chasing ghosts," she said, her voice low and steady. "That tunnel? It's older than the school." "What do you mean?" Vorrak asked. Velra stepped forward, pulling a wrinkled photo from her coat. It showed the school being constructed in the mid-80s, but in the background, barely visible, were workers uncovering a stone wall already buried in the earth. They built Grimweald Middle over something ancient, sealed it, covered it, but some tunnels were never completely closed. Her eyes locked with Vorrak's. "What you found under that cafeteria wasn't just a tunnel. It was part of whatever they tried to bury." Snarlgrim let out a short, sharp bark. Velra looked down at the dog, then back at Vorrak. "He smells it, doesn't he? The rot, the truth." Vorrak nodded silently. He didn't know what terrified him more, the growing evidence, or the fact that his brother Dren's disappearance might not have been the only one. Velra confirmed it. 6 kids went missing in the late 90s, all around that school, all dismissed as runaways. Vorrak looked down at the blueprint again. That red X burned in his mind. He had to go back. But this time he wouldn't be going in alone. There were others who needed to know the truth. Others who had been running from the same shadows for far too long. By the time Vorrak Bloodsnarl returned home, night had swallowed Grimweald whole. He stood by his fireplace, watching the flames twist and crackle. The piece of cloth found in the tunnel rested on the table beside him, sealed in a bag. Blue and black flannel, just like the shirt his brother Dren Hollowgaze wore the day he vanished. The memories he'd buried so carefully for nearly 30 years were clawing their way back up. And something deep inside him whispered, Dren might still be down there. Snarlgrim paced nervously along the edge of the room, sniffing near the floorboards. Vorrak had seen the dog anxious before, but not like this. It was as if whatever was beneath that school was leaking into the world above, into their home. He picked up his phone and dialed someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Zira Grimweald. She was once Dren's closest friend, and the last person to see him the day he disappeared. Zira agreed to meet him the next morning at Hollow Creek Cemetery, where Dren's memorial stood. She arrived wrapped in a gray coat, her long dark hair streaked with silver. Her face was older, but her eyes hadn't changed. They still carried guilt. "You never knew the truth," she said, standing by the stone that bore Dren's name. "The school. It wasn't just bad luck. There was something wrong even back then." "What do you mean?" Vorrak pressed. "Dren was scared," she replied. "The week before he disappeared, He told me he was hearing voices from the floor vents. He said the voices knew his name. At first, I thought he was just being dramatic. But then, he stopped sleeping. Said something was waiting for him under the cafeteria. He drew pictures, Vorrak. They weren't normal. She handed him a folded sketch from her pocket. Vorrak opened it slowly, and felt the air leave his lungs. It was a drawing of a creature. Long arms, hollow eyes, a mouth stitched shut. The figure stood in a tunnel beneath a school. And behind it, barely visible, was another smaller figure reaching out, wearing a blue and black flannel shirt. Vorrak's hands trembled. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I was afraid," Zira whispered. "But now, it's happening again, isn't it?" Vorrak looked at the drawing, then at the memorial stone, and felt the weight of years crash down on him. He had to go deeper, and this time he would bring answers back or not come back at all. Vorrak Bloodsnarl didn't sleep. At dawn, he stood in front of the school again, staring at its brick facade as if it were something alive. The blueprint from the records office was folded tightly in his coat pocket, and Snarlgrim stood at his side, ears high, body tense. The school was closed for the weekend, and the silence around it felt unnatural. Vorrak had made up his mind. He was going back down there, this time, to the section marked with the red X. He wasn't alone. Nixer Bonevale, a structural engineer and Vorrak's oldest childhood friend, had agreed to join him. Nixer had helped design several emergency tunnels for local infrastructure and owed Vorrak more than a few favors. "Whatever you think is down there," Nixer warned, holding a portable scanner. "If the ceiling hasn't collapsed already, the oxygen levels might still kill us before anything else does." Vorrak nodded grimly. "It's not just concrete we're walking into," he said. "It's a memory with teeth." They lowered themselves back into the tunnel through the cafeteria vent. The air was colder than before. The flashlight beams barely penetrated the thick shadows. As they moved deeper into the network, Nixer began scanning the walls. "This wasn't made for plumbing or wiring," he muttered. "This was carved by hand. Look at the markings." Vorrak ran his fingers across the gouges in the stone. They weren't tool marks. They looked scratched. Further in, they found something Vorrak hadn't seen before. An old wooden door, half-rotted, bolted shut with rusted chains. Snarlgrim growled at it instantly, tail stiff. Vorrak motioned to Nixer. They cut through the chains and pulled the door open with effort. Behind it lay a chamber, low-ceilinged, circular, and lined with brick. And in the center of the floor, a small metal chair. Shackles hung from its arms. Beside it, a dusty journal. Vorrak picked it up carefully and opened it. The first page read, "Property of Dren Hollowgaze." He froze. Inside were short, frantic entries written in a child's scrawl. Most of them made little sense. Random words, panic drawings, and pages soaked with stains. But one phrase repeated itself over and over, carved into the last page like it had been etched with a fingernail. "It hears what you forget. It lives where we don't look." Nixer stepped back, shaken. "This isn't a tunnel," he whispered. "It's a trap." Vorrak looked around the chamber and noticed something else. There were fresh footprints in the dust. The footprints weren't small. Vorrak Bloodsnarl knelt, flashlight trembling in his grip, and traced them with his eyes. Heavy boot prints, fresh in the dust, leading away from the chamber and deeper into the tunnel system. But they weren't alone. A second set of prints followed beside them, uneven and bare. Human, but distorted, as if whoever had left them had been dragging one leg, the heel scraping against the concrete in irregular intervals. Nixer Bonevale crouched beside Vorrak, breathing shallowly. "These weren't here before," he said. "Someone's still down here, maybe more than one." Snarlgrim stood frozen near the center of the chamber, ears twitching. He let out a low, broken whine, the kind Vorrak had only heard once years ago, when they found the remains of a missing child buried in a storm drain. Vorrak's fingers tightened around the flashlight. "We follow them," he said. "We don't stop until we find out what's behind this." They moved slowly through the narrow passage, deeper than Vorrak had ever dared to go. The air thickened. Pipes gave way to carved stone, the walls damp and breathing cold. Strange markings appeared again. Symbols scratched into the brick, spirals and broken letters, all repeating like some forgotten warning. Vorrak began to hear things. Faint whispers, just beyond recognition. At first, he thought it was his mind playing tricks. But then he realized Nixer had stopped walking, frozen in place. "You hear that?" Nixer whispered. "Yes," Vorrak replied, voice steady. A sound echoed through the tunnel. A voice, childlike, breathless, called out, "Vorrak?" It drifted through the passage like smoke, familiar and unnatural. Vorrak's blood ran cold. Snarlgrim backed away, tail tucked, growling low. "No one knew my name down here," Vorrak muttered. "Not back then." Ahead, the tunnel opened into a larger room. It was a forgotten basement, filled with crumbling furniture and rotting books. In the center stood a figure, motionless, turned away from them. Pale skin, torn flannel shirt. Vorrak's heart stopped. "Dren!" The figure didn't turn. Snarlgrim barked once, sharp and panicked. Then the lights on their flashlights flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the room in an instant. From behind them, something whispered, "He never left." Darkness pressed in from all sides. Vorrak Bloodsnarl froze, heart pounding in his ears. The sudden absence of light wasn't just blindness. It was suffocation. He reached out instinctively, brushing against Nixer Bonevale's jacket. "Don't move," he whispered. Snarlgrim growled low behind them, circling with cautious steps, his claws clicking on the damp concrete floor. Then came the sound. A rasping breath, inches from Vorrak's ear. Not his own. Not Nixer's. Something else was in the room. Something that hadn't made a sound when it moved. Vorrak raised his flashlight, tapping it, shaking it. Nothing. But the voice returned, low and wet, speaking words not meant for daylight. "He watches from the old skin, he waits inside the walls." Panic clawed at Nixer's face. "That voice, Vorrak, that wasn't Dren. That thing is imitating him." Vorrak swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had spent decades imagining his brother's return, hoping for redemption or peace. But what stood in that room might not be Dren at all. Or worse, it might be what was left after Dren was taken. Suddenly, light flickered again. Vorrak's flashlight sputtered to life, weak and dim, casting just enough illumination to reveal the shape still standing in the center. The figure had not moved. His back was to them. Vorrak stepped forward, ignoring Nixer's whispered protest. "Dren," he said, voice cracking. "If that's you, turn around." The silence that followed was deeper than before, almost like the tunnel itself held its breath. Then, slowly, the figure turned. The face was pale and sunken, stretched over sharp bones. But the eyes, those were unmistakable. Vorrak would have known them anywhere. Blue, wide, and filled with something ancient. Not fear. Not sadness. Hunger. The figure smiled, but it wasn't Dren's smile. "Vorrak," it said softly. "Why didn't you come sooner?" Snarlgrim lunged before Vorrak could respond, barking with fury, breaking whatever hold the creature had. The figure screeched, a sound that cracked the walls like old plaster, and darted backward into the shadows with impossible speed. Vorrak pulled Nixer toward the door. "We're not done here," he said. "But we need more than flashlights next time." As they scrambled out, the whisper followed them again, this time inside Vorrak's own thoughts. "You brought him back. You let the door open." Vorrak Bloodsnarl sat alone in the back room of his house, the blinds drawn and the lights off. The encounter in the tunnel had left a weight on his chest that refused to lift. Dren was alive, or something wearing Dren's face was. Vorrak could still hear that voice. Not the words, but the way it sounded. Like it had been underground for years, swallowing silence and speaking only nightmares. Snarlgrim lay by the door, tail still, eyes fixed on the hallway like he expected something to walk out of the walls. He needed answers. And he knew exactly where to go, Kedra Ironwhale. She had been the lead architect for the original school expansion project, and after retiring abruptly, she'd withdrawn to a remote farmhouse outside town. Some said she went mad. Others said she'd seen something she shouldn't have. Vorrak didn't care. If she knew what was buried beneath Grimweald Middle, he had no choice but to face her. When he arrived at the Iron Whale property, the sky had turned a dull gray, like it too was holding its breath. Kedra answered the door slowly, her face gaunt, her eyes sharp as ever. "I wondered when someone would come," she muttered. "I told them this day would return. They never listened." Vorrak stepped inside, the air thick with dust and something else. Something earthy and rotting, like mildew and metal. Kedra walked him through rooms filled with rolled-up blueprints, newspaper clippings, and strange symbols carved into wooden planks. She stopped by a drawer, pulled out an envelope and handed it to him. Inside were photos, black and white images taken during construction. One showed workers uncovering a brick chamber beneath what would become the cafeteria. Another showed a sealed stone door, marked with a spiral symbol. The same one Vorrak had seen scratched into the tunnel walls. "That door was older than the foundation," Kedra whispered. "We weren't building over empty ground. We were building over something locked away." She looked him in the eye. Dren Hollowgaze wasn't the first. He was just the first to open the whispering door. Vorrak's hands clenched the photos. "Whatever's down there, it's not finished." "No," she said softly. "It's only waking up. And every time someone listens, it remembers." Vorrak turned toward the door, his resolve hardening. He needed help. Someone who didn't fear what waited in the dark. Someone like Thorn Wraithpaw. Thorn Wraithpaw didn't ask questions. He never did. Vorrak Bloodsnarl had called him just once, said, "It's Dren. I need you." And that was enough. Thorn arrived at Vorrak's doorstep before midnight, wearing his black tactical jacket, a long duffel slung over his shoulder, and the same cold look in his eyes he'd worn since they served together years ago. Snarlgrim immediately growled low, then lowered his head in submission. Even the dog knew better than to challenge Thorn. They gathered at Nixer Bonevale's workshop, which had been converted into a makeshift command post. Vorrak laid out the blueprints from Kedra Ironwhale, along with the photos and the journal entries. "It's not just a tunnel. It's a structure. A chamber that was locked, not forgotten." Nixer added, "The oxygen levels drop sharply past the inner corridor. But it's not collapse or decay. Something down there is absorbing energy. Maybe even feeding on it." Thorn listened, arms crossed. Then he looked at Vorrak. "We bring it into the light. No more hiding. No more running." Vorrak nodded. They packed thermalights, rebreathers, backup batteries, and sound recorders. Thorn brought something else. A handmade spike of polished silver wrapped in wire. "It's not a weapon," he said. "It's a reminder that we came prepared to end it, not just to understand it." The three of them descended into the tunnels once more, Vorrak, Nixer, and Thorn, with Snarlgrim leading the way. The atmosphere was colder than before, but no longer silent. There was a pulse in the walls, a slow vibration, like the heartbeat of something enormous or ancient. As they neared the chamber again, the whispering returned. This time louder. Not random murmurs, but chanting. Words in a language none of them recognized, echoing from the stone. They reached the bricked room. The old chair was still there, but the journal was gone. In its place sat a pile of small bones, arranged in a perfect spiral. Thorn knelt beside them. "These aren't animal," he muttered. Vorrak turned to the wall where Dren had once been. It was cracked now, wider. Something had forced its way out, and the tunnel behind it pulsed with warm, moist air. Then came the voice, clear, childlike. "Vorrak, you brought them, just like before." Snarlgrim growled, stepping back. Thorn gripped the silver spike. Vorrak looked ahead into the dark, into the widening mouth of the final passage. And for the first time in his life, he didn't know if Dren could be saved, or if he ever wanted to be. The final passage sloped downward, its walls slick with condensation and streaked with something darker, like dried blood or time itself. Vorrak Bloodsnarl led the way, flashlight trembling, Snarlgrim at his side, ears pinned flat. Behind them, Nixer Bonevale checked oxygen levels while Thorn Wraithpaw carried the silver spike in both hands. His eyes locked forward. None of them spoke. There was only the chanting. Closer now. Human voices, layered and hollow, as if echoing from another lifetime. They entered the heart of the structure. A chamber far larger than anything on the blueprints. Its walls curved inward, lined with carvings of open mouths, stitched eyes and spirals, always spirals. In the center stood a stone altar. Upon it, motionless, sat a figure, pale, thin, wearing the same flannel shirt Vorrak had buried in memory for nearly 30 years. Dren hollow-gaze, his head lifted slowly. "You found me," Dren said. His voice wasn't monstrous. It was tired, worn thin by decades of silence. Vorrak stepped forward, heartbreaking, rage and love colliding inside his chest. "What happened to you?" he asked. "What is this place?" Dren blinked slowly. "They called. I listened. I answered. But I was never alone." He gestured to the walls. "It lives in here, in the quiet between thoughts. It eats memory, and gives something back in return." Nixer whispered, "We should leave," but Dren stood. "No, you brought the light, so now you have to see it." The chamber began to shudder. The carvings writhed, mouths opening in unison, exhaling cold wind that reeked of rust and rot. Thorn Wraithpaw stepped forward, driving the silver spike into the ground at the altar's base. A crack split the floor. A deep, howling sound erupted from beneath. Snarlgrim barked once, then fell silent, tail still. Vorrak reached for his brother. "Come with me," he pleaded. "We can end this together." But Dren shook his head. "I'm part of it now." The walls began to collapse inward. Nixer pulled Vorrak back. "We have to go. Now." As the three men sprinted toward the exit, Snarlgrim at their heels, Vorrak looked back one last time. Dren stood calmly at the center, eyes closed, as the stone fell around him. And then he was gone. They emerged into daylight, sunlight burning away the cold. The tunnel sealed behind them with a muffled thud. Grimweald was quiet again. But Vorrak would never forget what he saw. Because some darkness doesn't die. It just waits to be remembered.